everyone, and welcome to Elmhurst College and the lecture. At this time, we ask that you please silence all cell phones, and if you need to make a call or anything, please step out to be respectful to the speaker. And now at this time, I'd like to welcome our president, Larry Braskamp.
As the interim president of Elmhurst College, I want to welcome all of you here this evening to the Quest lecture, a lecture which is in honor of Roland Quest, who graduated from Elmhurst College in 1936. This lecture series is one in which we wish to promote a variety of topics that stimulate our thinking in both our college and the community, and of course tonight is no exception. I now wish to introduce Dr. Elzada Timpton, who is a Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the Faculty. Elzada.
I'm very pleased to be able to introduce Jeff Corwin. Emmy-winning television host, author, and biologist, Jeff Corwin has worked for the conservation of endangered species and ecosystems around the globe. Through education and awareness, he believes these vital elements of our planet can be conserved for future generations. For nearly 20 years, Jeff has produced and hosted a variety of popular television series broadcast on networks like Disney Channel, Discovery Channel, NBC, Animal Planet, Travel Channel, and the Food Network. Presently, Jeff is executive producer and host of the award-winning weekly series Ocean Mysteries, airing weekends on ABC stations nationally. Each week on Ocean Mysteries, Jeff opens viewers' eyes to the extraordinary stories that lie beneath our oceans, while enhancing our understanding about our oceans' life-sustaining value to the planet. In addition to exploring the state of our planet's wildlife and ecology, Jeff has served as an environmental and science correspondent for CNN, CBS, and NBC News. Beyond television, Jeff has partnered with the Whitaker Center to produce the film Expedition Chesapeake, and with Rodale to publish the book 100 Heartbeats. Beyond print, Jeff has launched Jeff Corwin's Explorer series, which consists of interactive multimedia ebooks focusing on wildlife. Jeff is also the author of Living on the Edge, Amazing Relationships in the Natural World. And now to give us a taste of what we have to look forward to, we have a short video for you.
I'm Jeff Corwin, and I consider myself to be one of the luckiest people on the planet. You see, my career happens to be my life passion. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, exploring incredible ecosystems, and then telling the stories of the amazing species living there to a global audience. These moments have often been enlightening, sometimes heartwarming, and yes, even humorous.
Well, I wanted to talk about this gator a little more. Oh, that felt good. There we go. I'll be back. I will speak to Boba Fett, and we'll find Obi-Wan and take care of it. Okay, come on, girls. This is our opening performance. I want to see smiles. I want to hear lots of clicking and some grunting. Remember, okay, Janine, you go, girl. You're next, honey. You go. Now, do a good job. Okay. What? I'll pay you later. No. Wasn't that nice? I have become the buffet for a leech. He has inchwormed his way up my leg and has attached himself to a nice supply of blood. Thank gosh, he's a few inches below another very important supply of blood. You're gonna look really good. What we'll do is we'll just lift this up, and we're gonna take years off you. Just gonna lift that up. We're gonna tuck it behind the ears, and you're gonna look 21 again. So, hey, stop that. Stop that. Where are you going? Hey, stop that. I said I'd give you peanuts.
Look at the size of this frog. Look at this. He's like, remember when I said I'd kill you last? I lied.
Look at the size of those antlers. They're Yeah, you've got very big antlers. Yeah, you do. From the looks of it, it appears that she's wrapping things up here. Yep. Yep. I think she's done, and I'm done too.
But my mission today, to share these incredible stories of wildlife and nature, is motivated by the fear that many of these incredible species that I've witnessed in my lifetime will simply disappear, gone forever. Scientists estimate that we may be losing species up to 10,000 times greater than their natural rate of extinction. This is what is called a mass extinction. We've had 5 in our planet's history. The most recent and well-known is when the age of dinosaurs came to an end 65 million years ago. But unlike those previous mass extinctions, the one unfolding on our planet today is not the result of evolution or natural catastrophe. It is fueled by the actions of a single species, our own. It's been said that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. By the time our children are grown, orangutans, rhinos, condors, and many of the other amazing species we have witnessed, along with countless others, may fall prey to extinction, gone forever. Ironically, the only species capable of stopping this catastrophe is the same one that is causing it, humankind. Today, life on Earth is under serious threat, with many of our planet's species now teetering on the edge of extinction. If we stay on our current course, within the next 20 years, we're at risk of losing 1 out of every 5 species living on the planet. And by the middle of this century, more than 1 million species could vanish forever. What is the cause, and are we too late to reverse the course?
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Corwin.
Hey guys. My God. Oh, can I say that here? Thank you very much. I feel like a minister. Well, I am delighted to be able to spend the evening with you here at Elmhurst College. And I was speaking to some folks earlier when I first arrived, and I felt like I was back at the school where I went to. This campus just looks like Bridgewater State University. And actually, when I went there, it was Bridgewater State College, and it was a smaller amount of folks, probably closer to what you guys have for a population at this school. And it was literally, I felt like I was back at school. They must have like some blueprint that they lay out for universities where they just plunk them around. But it's a really a replete, beautiful campus, and I'm delighted to be able to be with you on your 3rd sunny day in spring that you've had. Just like you, we thought we beat the bullet back in New England. We had the mildest winter on record. The week before spring began, it was almost 80 degrees. And then on the day of spring, it snowed 5 inches. So we're going to have a great time this evening. And in the process of having a great time, it will give us an opportunity to explore and unravel the mysteries of a really profound event that's unfolding on our planet today, an event that impacts every organism that calls itself an earthling. You know, when I say that word earthling, sort of organomorphically, we think of what? People, right?
But the truth is, to be an earthling, you have to live on Earth. And incredibly, in the history of our planet, the 6 or 7 billion years plus of having a planet, and the 2+ billion years of life, and the 1 billion year of really complex life, and in the last 500 million years of incredible diversity with vertebrates and invertebrates and aquatic animals and terrestrial creatures, and this whole span of life on this incredible green little orbit, we have this profound event caused by one species, which is us. And this event is an extinction that is unparalleled in the history of our planet. We're going to unravel that extinction concept in a way that I hope it makes sense. But before I begin that conversation with you, you're watching these videos and I can't stand them. I actually have to close the doors. I hate the sound of my voice. And that's very common in television. And I cannot stand to see myself on TV, or I can't stand to hear the sound of my voice. My kids, on the other hand, love to be on TV. My kids will have nothing to do with an animal until a film crew shows up at the house and like, oh, I'm like Bindi Irwin, let me help my dad. I'm like, no, you're not, get out of here. But you see this guy up there who for 20 years has been making animal TV shows. And I began with Going Wild. It was my first series on Disney almost 20 years ago. And then I've had probably 9 or 10 different series, from Food Network to Animal Planet to Travel Channel. And my current series is Ocean Mysteries. That's on ABC. It's our 5th season. And I found out last week we were nominated for 4 Emmys. So I was very excited about that. And we were nominated for Best Travel Show, Best Producer, Best Editor, and Best Host. And you know the power of an Emmy. If you take an Emmy and you walk into a Starbucks and you bring $5, you can get a cup of coffee. It's pretty incredible. But you see this guy who's got to travel the world and live his dream, and I've had the chance to rub shoulders with my heroes like David Attenborough. I just did a film for David Attenborough called Galapagos Nature Wonderland. It's an IMAX film and it's really good, so go see it. And I also, I've got to work with Jane Goodall and all these people. And I think sometimes people may get the misconception that, hey, maybe he's Jane Goodall and David Attenborough's kid or something. But the truth is, my beginnings are quite pedestrian. Like most of us, my dad is a retired police officer, and my mom is a retired nurse. And when they began their lives, very humbly, we lived in a what we say back home, a triple-decker. It's not unlike something you would see in The Departed, and not the nicest part of Boston. And there was no nature, there was no wildlife. My dad worked 70 hours a week. He worked in a donut shop, he worked in a printing shop, and he was a police officer. My parents put themselves through school like most of our parents do. And I had no nature. I hungered for nature, but there was nothing there in this urban, delightful place. Until one day, we went to visit my grandparents' house. You can come on in, open the door. Come on in. Yes. We'll make a seat for you. I hope you brought the ambrosia salad. And I was in my grandma Chickie, God rest her soul, sat in her big old easy chair, and they lived in kind of a mobile type home type thing that wasn't very mobile. And she's sitting there with the Fresca in one hand and a Pall Mall in the other. Well, I'm in the backyard exploring, and I look at this stack of wood, and I see something on top, perfectly coiled, that I've never seen before. And I started to shake. If anyone here is a snake person, when you saw your first snake, you know what I'm talking about. My legs it still happens to me when I see a snake. And I started to shake, and I was so excited I couldn't even yell to have someone bear witness to this thing that no one had ever seen before. And just at the moment of discovery, it unraveled like a turban and melted into the wood, and it was gone. And I was crushed. And then I went and actually started tipping over this wood and raking and working my way down, and literally just inches away was this little tip of a tail just going down to the wood, and I was in tears because I thought I was about to lose this thing. And finally you get to that layer of wood that no one ever uses, that you always put new wood in the top. It's all sort of spongy and slimy, and I rolled it over, and I could feel all the roots snap as it pulled back, and you saw like a wisp of an old cocoon and a spider's web and these white little tendrils. And right in the middle was this coiled up creature. And I looked at it, and it looked at me, and it looked like it was about to leave, and I just instinctively, at 6 years old, reached out and grabbed onto it. And it instinctively reached back and grabbed onto me. And I walk into the double wide, and there's Chickie with this cigarette in her hand. She goes, "What the hell is that?" I said, "Grandma, it's a snake." She went, "Get rid of it." And I went, "No." And she said, "Why not?" And I said, "Because I love it." So they pried the snake off my arm. We had our I couldn't keep it. We had to let it go. My dad took me out to the backyard, and we liberated this poor, terrified serpent. And it was amazing. The moment I found that snake, I knew for the rest of my life I would be a naturalist. I did not know how it would manifest. I didn't know if I was going to be a teacher or a professor or work at a zoo. And it's funny, you talk about zoos. One of my best friends was a curator at a zoo, and he got his PhD, and he was in one of the enclosures, and he was cleaning up some animal scat, and some guy stopped with this kid. It was at the Franklin Park Zoo, and my friend's working away, and he grabs his kid and he says, "See, if you don't go to college, you'll be doing this for the rest of your life." So he dropped his broomstick and he quit. But I saw this snake, and that was the lightning bolt, and I knew I would work with animals for the rest of my life. And I often think, if I had rolled over that log, and it was a guitar, maybe it had been like a rock star or something. Or maybe if I had rolled over that log and it was a golf club, maybe it had been a Tiger Woods or a serial killer or something, I don't know. But it was a snake. And if you know anything about snakes, they are the ultimate creature of habit. They have a very strong affinity to the habitat where they live. And you could take a snake, and I don't know if any of you have ever done this, because I used to try to, when my family eventually moved to a more suburban-y country setting, I wanted, like a mother's nightmare. My mother would see me, she's like, "What the heck does he have now?" And she'd see me like, letting snakes go in our backyard. I'd go catch them in other places. I imagined I'd want snakes, just like Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom. I wanted the snakes everywhere. So I'd let these snakes go, and they'd go away, and I'd find them 2 miles away under the same tin or piece of piling board where I found them. They have a great magnetic connection to the places where they live. And me and this snake, we kind of developed a little bit of a truce, an acceptance. And as long as that I didn't mess with it too much, it would allow me to observe it. And it had no fear of me. And for 2 years, I observed this snake. And I learned so much. This was my gateway experience into the world of natural history and becoming a naturalist. I learned about ecdysis, watching it shed its skin, and the drabby gray is peeled away like an old sock, and the bright, shiny, new, glimmering scales underneath kind of, you could see how this could be the impetus for the sign of renewal or rejuvenation or medicine. I learned about predation, watching this snake grapple with a big old slug, and learned about defense when that slug produced something that caused that snake to just repel it out of its mouth. At the ripe old age of 7, I learned about reproduction. Watching my snake, which I had named Sam, sticking its head up through the leaf litter, moving about. Then all of a sudden, all these curious, amorous little heads popped around it, and then I realized Sam was Sally. And Sally moved on in, and out came all these snakes, and they twisted and coiled. Like Medusa's head created this yarn ball of snakes. And somewhere down the middle of 2 or 3 dozen garter snakes was this plump Rubenesque Sally just hanging out there. And all these snakes are fighting for access to her. And it all made sense as I started learning about evolution and about the survival of the fittest, and seeing how only one will be successful and get down through that maelstrom of scales and snake and serpents and find her and reproduce and breed with her. And this snake, which had sent for a mile perhaps, acres through this landscape, left little trails, little enticing droplets of pheromones that brought them in. That snake that invited this Caligula-like moment of serpents in the leaf litter, instantly, once she had what she needed, she had the genetic material of her mate. She produced a plug that prevented any other males to sire with her, and then produced odors of repulsion and literally drove them away. And anyone who's been married knows exactly what I'm talking about. So I learned so much from this snake. And she was why I became a naturalist. She was also why I became a conservationist. Because one day I was sitting there watching her, laying about on a piece of slate, just sunning. And then all of a sudden there was chaos. This snake almost looked like 2 snakes. The back end of her was writhing pathetically, twisting about, while the front part of her was angrily biting in the air till it just kind of cycled down and stopped since its mouth was open. And what happened? And my viewpoint, I think it was about 8 at the time, my viewpoint opened up, and there was my grandparents' next door neighbor with the spade in his hand. And he had decapitated and dispatched this snake. And that was the day that I became a conservationist. That was the day that I learned that good people make bad decisions when they lack information. And that set me on my course. Of course, how do you get from that to having a TV show? That was an incredibly long journey, but that's just kind of a little amuse-bouche of the Jeff Corwin experience of how I get to do what I do. And it's been a great career. But what I have learned in a real profound way is the impact our species is having on our planet. So I mentioned that today we have a level of extinction that really is unparalleled. It is only matched by that moment in time 60 or 70 million years ago when an asteroid twisted its way into our orbit, crashed into our planet, and changed life forever. That moment back then is very much like what we are experiencing today. But the difference is, we are the asteroid. We are the one that is slamming into our planet and taking away the opportunity and the right for survival for those creatures that have made the battle to be what they are as species. When we talk about extinction, it's interesting because I think a lot of people think extinction isn't good. And certainly no one wants to be extinct. But extinction is very natural. If you were to look at all the life forms that have come across our planet, 99.9% of them are extinct. If you were to explore our oceans today, you would find 400 incredible species of sharks. But if you were here a couple of 100 million years ago, there was 4,000 species of sharks. There were sharks that were 5-6 times bigger than a great white shark. There were sharks that were this big that actually moved like flying fish and could actually leap out of the water. Fascinating diversity of sharks. But many of them have fallen prey to extinction. Extinction basically, in a natural sense, means a model of life just doesn't fit. And sometimes that model upgrades through this casual passage of genetics that kind of matriculate forward until it becomes something else through subtle changes in the natural world, in the environment, that cause the bad genes to go away and invite the good genes that either have a behavior or a characteristic that promotes survival to move forward. Sometimes it's dramatic. Sometimes it's a major change where everything is wiped out and only the toughest pioneers can survive. Sometimes extinction means you're just becoming a specialist. A lot of people think if you're a specialist in nature, that's your first step towards extinction, right? If you're a generalist, you eat anything. But if you're a specialist like a hummingbird and you only target, like in the Amazon or in Central America in the rainforest, you only target specific things to eat, that's great when you have those things, but when they disappear, you become extinct. That's one argument for why cheetahs are disappearing. Cheetahs were in trouble long before us. We've the cherry on the cheetah extinction sundae, but cheetahs have been in trouble for about 20,000 years. So that's kind of how extinction is played for millions of years on our planet. But the difference today is we are the genesis of this extinction. And I was talking to some students earlier, and for me what is so powerful and profound about that is unlike an organism that could cause extinction, like malaria has caused extinction of birds, avian malaria. Malaria doesn't know what it is, doesn't know what it's doing. We know what we do. We can do something that no other species can do. Some get close. Some maybe have their own modeling version of it. But no one, like Homo sapiens, can actually perceive a future. We know our own mortality in a way that no other species does. We know that if you invest in a certain thing, it will pay off if things happen right. You know if you exercise tonight, you'll feel better tomorrow. You know if you overeat tonight, you're going to feel terrible tomorrow. And you're going to blame your wife because your jean buttons don't button. Like I blame or whoever's washing my clothes. When I wash my jeans, I'm like, don't put them in the dryer. We know what we're doing, yet we aren't prepared to make the radical changes necessary to prevent the loss of our planet's life. How much life are we losing? We lose one species every 20 minutes to a half an hour. Today, we will lose 2 species, 2.5 species. And it's a great loss for our planet. We all pay the price for that. So how does extinction happen today? What are we doing? And again, something I mentioned earlier. I wrote this book called 100 Heartbeats, which is used at the school. I was excited to hear as part of the curriculum. And it became a documentary for NBC. And it came out of a paper I read when I was an undergraduate, almost 30 years ago. More than that, actually, 30-something years ago. That's scary. And I read this paper when I was a freshman, and it talked about the 100 Heartbeat Club. It was written by my idol, Dr. E.O. Wilson, who I've had the good fortune to meet. And if you read my book, you rewrote a nice little note about it, which was great. E.O. Wilson is the ultimate scientist in the world. And I read this paper, and it said, we are not far away where we are going to have many creatures, many of them charismatic species that have played a big role in ecology and folklore and our own cultural experiences, these will be going away. And we are going to be at a point where we will have 100 or less of these individual animals. And what decisions are we going to make? And here's what I think is heading in that direction. I remember reading this, I'm like, there's no way this is going to happen. Well, sure enough, it did, which inspired me to write the book and do the documentary. So what is it about extinction? Well, there was a book that I loved. In addition to loving nature and science and adventure and wildlife, I love nautical history. Love nautical history. I live in a little island, and I have a boat, and I actually used to work as a historical interpreter on the Mayflower in Plymouth, Massachusetts. He used to talk like this, good eye, mate, you know, all this silly stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I love history. I read this book called The Perfect Storm. Has anyone ever read that book? It's a great book, a crappy movie, but a great book. It's also a crappy movie if you see it and people are speaking Malay, because I started in Malaysia and I had no idea what they were saying. But I don't think I missed much because it was that bad of a movie. But the book is awesome, and it's about a boat called the Andrea Gale that sets off out of, I think, Gloucester, New Bedford. And I actually went to school with one of the kids in the boat who worked on that boat as a fisherman. And they went out to the banks in search of swordfish. And they encountered a perfect storm. And the perfection of that storm wasn't in its elegance or its beauty. It was in its deadliness, its lethality. Things that had happened to make this an unsurvivable storm. They couldn't have picked a worse time to go out and fish, but they had no idea what was in store for them. The tide had conspired to be the biggest tide of the season, like a 14-foot tide, mixed with an incredibly powerful lunar cycle in a time of the year, late fall, early winter, where the waters were treacherously cold, unsurvivable for more than 20 minutes, even in a survival suit. And then they hit a nor'easter, or as we say, a nor'easter, and it was unsurvivable, and they all perished. And later, as my life as a naturalist and TV stuff, I thought about that book, and I started looking at extinction like a perfect storm. Because in that perfect storm that took out the crew of the Andrea Gale, the elements, the tide, the wind, the storm, the cold, the thermal stuff, all conspired to create this deadly storm. Well, the extinction storm also has elements that conspire. What are the major components of extinction? First would be habitat loss. Second would be, and they're actually all equal, climate change. Another would be species exploitation, the black market trade of wildlife, which is a $20 billion a year industry, second only to guns and narcotics. The third would be pollution and the fourth, pollution and environmental degradation, and the fifth is human population growth. All of these things on their own are terrible, but together they conspire and feed onto each other. For example, right now the hot zone, ground zero for extinction, is places like Sumatra, Borneo, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Why? What's happening there? The rainforests and peat forests are being cleared to make room for palm oil. Globally, we shave off. Does anyone know how many rainforests we take off our planet every hour? Anyone have an idea? Want to take a guess? Yes, young man. 2, 3. Actually, 3. Then add 3 zeros. 3,000 acres of rainforest every hour. So 2,999, or actually 2,998. I'm really bad at math. I'm so bad at math that I had to help my daughter, who's a first grader, with her math homework, and it came back. You know, you have to sign it, and it came back, and then my wife had to do everything I did over again. And my daughter's math teacher wanted to talk to me about my math. But we lose 3,000 acres of rainforest every hour. That's a mass of trees, plants, and animals the size of Connecticut scraped off our earth every year. And a small lens of that is happening in that part of the world. All that forest is being cleared to make room for palm oil. How do we connect to this? 1 out of every 10 products in a supermarket shelf contain palm oil. From stabilizers in ice cream to frosting to lip balm. When you clear that forest, you take all that carbon stored in the vegetation, billions of tons of it in the last decade, and you send that into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. So that habitat loss has contributed to climate change. You clear that area, and you take all those animals, lions. Why are there only 40 elephants left in Borneo? Why will tigers be gone in the next 8 or 9 years, and there's only a few hundred? Why are orangutans gone or nearly gone in that part of the world? Because they then get exploited in the black market wildlife trade. So you see how that plays into it. Climate change, habitat loss, and of course, human population growth. The more there is of us, the more resources we need to sustain us if we take a quantity approach to life quality versus a qualitative approach to life quality. So these are how these things feed into each other. That's just a small example. So what do we lose when we lose a rainforest? Well, rainforests only take up about 5% of the planet's surface. It's not a lot. But in that tiny little poster stamp sized bit of terra firma, we have 60% of all life on Earth lives in a rainforest. How do we benefit from that? Many of the foods we eat originated as rainforest products. Many of the medicines we use to survive originated as either a toxin in a frog's skin or a toxin in a plant's cuticle as a defense. We then turn into life-saving medicines. 40% of our medicines originated from rainforests. And they are our planet's bestiary for life on Earth. And we take them away for agriculture, for homesteading, for livestock, for mineral exploration, and for timber. So you can see how all of this is happening. And the great question is, what does it mean? How does it impact us personally? And why should you care? So I think to really illustrate that, you have to take it down to the personal. And I was thinking tonight, earlier today on the flight actually, I wanted to come up with an animal that kind of was like my train track in life, that connected me not only to nature and wildlife, but to conservation. And I think instinctively, probably a lot of you guys would think it would be snakes, because I love snakes. Again, I still get excited about snakes. I remember one time I was filming in Kiowa, South Carolina. I was actually in the middle of putting a radio collar on a bobcat with this ranger. My wife calls me up, and my daughter Maya, my oldest one, she was 3 at the time. And my wife said, you got to come home right now. I'm like, why? She says, your daughter's just found all these snakes. I'm thinking, this is in Massachusetts, there's copperheads, there's rattlesnakes. So I dashed back home, and sure enough, it was like a pornographic moment. It was a breeding ball of all these rat snakes just going at it. And I was like, oh goodness. And Maya's watching them, you know, and she looks up, she goes, Dad, you know what they're doing? And I'm like, what are they doing? And she goes, they're snuggling. I'm like, yes. Now go in the house and watch some TV. Get rid of this stupid nature stuff. But it's not snakes. That's not my divining rod through life. I think it would be elephants. Some of my best and worst moments in my life have involved elephants. I remember the first time I saw a wild elephant. It was my first series, Going Wild, and we were in South Africa and in the bushveld, and the vehicle was parked in the berm. We had a Range Rover, and my camera guy, Pierce, was shooting down at me, and I was a couple hundred yards away, and there, 100 yards from me in the middle are these baboons, and I'm talking about the baboons, and the baboons want nothing to do with me, and I'm prattling on, and I hear this noise behind this wall of vegetation. I hear this sound, and I kind of enthusiastically look at the camera and say, "Oh my gosh, you hear that? That's an elephant," all excited. I said, "Well, he'll probably smell us and just wander off." Like 10 seconds later, even louder. I was like, "Oh, it sounds like he's getting closer." And then all of a sudden you hear this big bugling sound. It just vibrated through you, and I looked at this wall of acacia, and it exploded as this giant bull elephant with ears out and tusks twisting up, coming right at me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble." But then I remembered Roloff, who was our ranger, said, "If you ever see an elephant chasing after you, do not run." Just like that. He talked just like that. A very pretty voice he had. And bad breath, and he'd spit. He'd talk to you. And I'm thinking, watching this thing run, I'm like, "Don't run, don't run, don't run, don't run." And I'm yelling at the group. I said, "Guys, hold your ground, hold your ground." He kind of stops and looks at me, and then comes at me like that. I just kind of went, "Ah, mother." And I was just waiting for like 40 feet of intestine to be piped into my underwear. I'm just frozen up. I go, "Ah," like that. And suddenly he goes past me, and I'm like, what if you don't run?" And then I look, and he's going after my crew, which is running back to their vehicle. And I was like, "That's what's happened. If you run, I told you, don't run." And they get in the vehicle, and they drive off. I'm like, "What? You've got to be kidding me." And then the elephant is chasing after them, and they're going, and I'm wondering if they're looking at him in the rearview mirror, does he seem closer than he actually is as they take off? And then I'm like by myself, and they're gone, and now I'm really scared, and I'm not joking you. If I was in a bar and I told you a story, you'd be like, "This guy's so full of it," but I have the TV show to prove it. A couple of days before we started filming, a guy at the camp we were at was killed and eaten by a lion. And it was crazy. They actually went out, and unfortunately, they killed the pride of the lion, and they had to pull. It was just a mess. Now that comes back to my mind as I'm by myself, just sitting there, and I'm looking over at the baboons, and they're kind of looking at me, and they're like, "Well, you ain't so tough now, naked ape. What are you going to do?" So I just ran in the woods, and I hid behind a tree like this. And I just waited and waited and waited, and then I hear this vehicle kind of back up, and I hear some people get out, and I hear Roloff go, "Jeff?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm over here." He goes, "All right, you're going to be okay." I'm like, "Good." He said, "But whatever you do, don't move." I'm like, "Oh, don't say that. That's like, don't jump. Don't move." And just then, this wet trunk comes on my forehead. I'm like, "Ugh," and then these two tusks go on the side of the tree, begin to push the tree. I then moved to another tree, and it came on over, and this went on, and eventually it lost interest and wandered off. And then I walk out of the woods shaking, ready for a new pair of underpants. I look at my crew, and I'm like, "You idiots, I could have died." And Pierce, the camera guy, was like, "Well, you didn't." I'm like, "Well, I could have." And I'm like, "Were you rolling?" He's like, "Oh my gosh, dude, it was amazing." Was it? And he said, "Let's go watch it." So we go back, and we put it in this is when you had a machine called a VCR, and press play, and we're watching it. The monitor, I'm like, "Okay. Oh, that's me. There's the baboons." I'm like, "Oh, there's something." I'm like, "What the hell is that? Is that an elephant, or is that an alien abduction?" Couldn't even tell. I see the camera moving, and I see Pierce's giant feet moving like this. And then I see a rosary hanging from a mirror in the thing. And that was my first elephant moment. The footage was less than stellar. And the second elephant story I'm going to tell you about happened I was actually, if you ever watched the Jeff Corwin Experience, that was the pilot show. If you ever watch that, see this really skinny, happy, enthusiastic young man with all brown hair, no gray hair. That was me. And that was our pilot episode. This was going to decide whether or not we got a TV series. And we filmed it in Borneo. And we went to look for these lost elephants. And we went with this scientist. We're wandering about. And it is so hot, stiflingly hot, and leeches everywhere. Now, Pierce and I, we had this love-hate relationship. We've worked with each other for many years, and everywhere you look, you have leeches. And so what I would do is, leeches are amazing animals. They really get a bad rap. But there's nothing more miraculous than a leech. A leech will sit with the ultimate patience on the very end of a drip tip of a leaf, a tiger leech, which is about as thin as a sharpened pencil and maybe an inch long, like an inchworm. And it sits there and it hangs and waits, and it waits, and it calculates, and it says, I can do this. And at the right calculation, the right moment, it makes the ultimate leap of faith, like jumping off a skyscraper, it jumps. And then if it plants right, it hits your leg and it tumbles down and it lands in your shoe. And then amazingly, it passes through your sock without tearing a thread. And then its suction cup, its radula, attaches to your skin. And then it produces an anesthetic, so there's no pain, and begins to slice through your skin. And then it produces an anticoagulant, so the blood flows liberally from your body. And a tiger leech, which starts out about an inch in length and not much wider than a sprinkle you'd get on your ice cream, gets to about 4 inches with about 3 ounces of blood. And it's quite amazing. So I would go through, Pierce and I, we always play jokes on each other. For example, that cheetah scene. When I pick a cameraman, I want a cameraman that's talented, has a great eye, and is about 30 pounds overweight. And Pierce fits that perfectly. He's got a big heart. It's probably enlarged, but it's big. And we're always playing these jokes. And that moment with the cheetah, where I do this sort of jiggle my keys, you must smell my cat at home thing, because I just bumped into a cheetah, and I'm trying to remind myself that there's no example of an adult being killed by a cheetah, as this cheetah is kind of getting closer and hissing and pouncing. And I hear him laughing. He's going, I'm like, what's so funny? And he says, oh, Jeff, you can't outrun that cheetah. I'm like, no, but I can outrun your fat ass. So that's why I had Pierce. So Pierce and I, we just always going at it. So I would go by and I'd get all these leeches. So I had about a dozen leeches. And when Pierce wasn't looking, I would just slip them into his left boot. It was really funny. So he has alley-oop sized feet, giant feet. So we'd stop and we'd check. I'm like, oh, look at this, Be Good TV. Let's get this leech off right here. And I'm like, I got a leech right here. And Brian, our PA, we're on a 6-week trip. India, Thailand, Indonesia. We are just a week into our trip, and Brian, our PA, who's 28 years old, so he's theoretically a grown man. I don't think that's a grown man anymore in American culture, but back then you were considered grown. And he comes up to me, and he tells me, early in the shoot, he says, hey, Jeff, I just figured out something. I'm like, what's up, buddy? He goes, I hate animals and I don't want to work with them. I'm like, what an odd career choice for you, Brian. So now I have Brian to deal with. Brian looks like Ray Bolger from The Wizard of Oz. He's got a Gilligan hat on. He's got a flannel shirt. He's got gumboots, which he's duct taped. And he's got garden gloves. He looks like the Scarecrow from Wizard of Oz. So he's running around acting like a banshee, driving me up the wall. Pierce, I've been slipping the leeches in his boot. So, really professional crew here. And so I check, I'm like, oh, I got one. And I hear Pierce kind of go, oh, yeah, I hear him go, as he pulls his chute off, and he's just like a Christmas tree of ornaments of leeches hanging down. His giant alley-oop feet are like, Japanese-bound princess foot number -2, like this big. I'm like, that was me. So, all of a sudden, our guide looks at me, and he says, shh. He says, we found the elephants. I'm like, well, where are they? And I'm looking, he says, look right there, and then look right there, and look right there, and 5 feet off the ground, and 8 feet off the ground. And we realize, as we've been bumbling and whining and slashing and moaning and groaning through that rainforest, those elephants had been with us the whole time and never snapped a branch. That was until hell broke loose. And the young adolescent elephants would push us towards the calves, the yearlings, and the moms would get really upset and charge us, like you saw in that video from that early time. And it was awesome for the first 10 minutes, but after an hour and a half, we were panicked. We'd like literally sneak on, like, oh, here they come again. And they would literally run, and this went on and on and on. And the loudness, when they like that, it would pierce your ears. And I remember sitting there like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I hear the elephants going off, and then I hear this. I'm like, what is that? And I look over, and Brian is crying right here. And I'm like, Brian, what are you doing? He goes, nothing, I've got Dean in my eyes, I think. I said, Brian, you're crying? Are you crying? And he goes, I'm not crying. And just like my daughter does when I'm mad at my daughter, he's doing this sort of crying, which I am, there's no mercy. I'm like, what are you doing? Stop, Brian, stop, Brian, stop. And he's going off, and I'm like, Brian. I said, Brian, you are acting like the first idiot who's going to get killed in this frickin' horror movie. Knock it off. The next elephant story I will tell you happened when we were in Africa, and we were at the Daphne Sheldrick Wildlife Orphanage. And I was so excited to be there because it was going to be an incredible episode. We'd gotten permission to not only work with the orphan elephants, all of them orphaned from the ivory trade. And, if you want to make an orphan elephant, it's easy. Just go for the babies, because the parents come in. They live in an incredible unit, a family unit, a matriarchal unit, led by a grandmother or a great-grandmother, and aunts and sisters and great-aunts all live together, and the males can hang around just till they hit puberty, and they're out. And they just have this incredible complex society. So when a baby's in trouble, moms come in, and now you have your ivory, and then that's how you make an orphan elephant. So we were there to tell that story, and we've got permission not only to work with them, but to actually spend the night. Why? Well, raising elephants is very difficult. First of all, they had a high level of mortality because the elephants, the rescuers couldn't figure out the formula. But then they figured out the right artificial formula, but still they had an unacceptable amount of mortality, like 25% of these babies were dying. Well, one day there was a storm, and everyone had to stay together in this one little paddock. And the next morning when they woke up, one of the elephants that was sick was better. So they began sleeping with the elephants and being with them. And their mortality rate went to a point where they had 99% survivability. And they were surviving from a mother's love, a surrogate mother's love. And we were going to be able to tell that story. And I was so excited. Remember, I'm like, I am going to have the ultimate slumber party. So here I am talking, and I've got Raj Kali. She's about this long, about this tall. She's about 4 weeks old. She still even has an umbilicus and all clumsy. But she still weighs about 300 pounds and 400 pounds. So I remember it's like, okay, so set the camera, turn down a little lamp, and on this scratchy straw with a big scratchy wool blanket, and there's this elephant, and it comes like this. And I'm trying to fall asleep. The elephant is sound asleep. This grassy breath from the trunk. And I'm trying to fall asleep, but I'm really conflicted because half of me is thinking, how many people in the world right now, how many people are being spooned by an elephant? And the other part of me was having a stroke from being spooned by an elephant. So I fall asleep, and then in the middle of the night, chaos. Blinding pain as if something is hitting me really hard, noising up and down, falling, tripping all over me, and I get my headlamp and I click it on, and I'm like, this thing is going crazy. Raj Kali is going crazy. I'm like, what is wrong? And it turns out the elephant is having a nightmare, a night terror, and it is such a panic. So they had to euthanize it right there, and it was, I'm only joking, they did. So I'm like, what to do? I don't know what to do. I'm like, hello, no one's responding. So I just kind of instinctively try to hold its head down, and you can't do that. Even as a baby, it's so strong. So I just kind of cupped its eye, and I kind of gently stroked its eyelashes, which were about this long, and I kind of like scratched its ear and whispered in the other ear, shh, 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 and it looked at me, went up, and then came down, and it laid its head on my chest. It was so heavy, and took a breath and was falling asleep. And right before it fell asleep, its clumsy little trunk, about this long, came up. You know, an elephant's trunk is amazing. They look so simple, just like a big tube. But an elephant's trunk is the ultimate evolutionary organ. It has more than 40,000 muscles and ligaments. A bull elephant can wave his trunk over a puddle of urine. It can actually smell if a female is in season and actually know that one day where she is reproductively viable and can be inseminated and be pregnant. And it knows that just by smelling its urine. It can destroy a tree and clear the savanna, dig a hole to create a natural well for other animals. It can pick up something as small as a grain of rice with its digits. But this was a clumsy little baby elephant's trunk, and it fumbled and twisted about and pushing it out of the way. And just as it fell asleep, it kind of twisted up like a little beanie, and the digits came together and grabbed a lock of my hair and began to twist it. And then it fell asleep. And that was a cool moment that I forgot all about until years later, and I had my first kid, Maya, and I had come home. Maya was 7 months old. My wife had not only just had a baby, she just finished her PhD, which was amazing. I remember she's very skinny, and when you looked at her this way, she looked normal, but skinny people that are pregnant, it's very funny, and they don't like if you say, "Are you having a baby dinosaur?" They don't think that's funny. And I remember she went to Brandeis, and she had to sit in front of all these old men and defend her presentation. She's like, "I don't know how I'm going to do this." And she gets her legs, and I'm like, you know what? You bring a water balloon, and if you don't like where that's going, you just drop that water balloon, and I'll get right out of your way. She didn't think that was funny either. She doesn't think a lot of the stuff. She goes, "Why do people think you're funny?" I don't think you're funny. But she said, "Okay, I'm going out with my friends tonight. I haven't been out. You are going to stay home and watch Maya, and two things are going to happen. Number one, when I come home, this house will not be on fire, and there will not be firemen here. And number two, this kid's going to have a pulse." And I'm like, "I can do that. I got your back." And she left, and I'm sitting there watching TV, and I'm bored, and it's like 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, God, I should probably check on Maya. So I go in there, and I'm looking in the crib, and she's, perfectly coiled up like a little puff adder in her bed, and just laying there. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so quiet. I'm like, Maya? Maya! She wakes up. "Oh, you're awake!" I pick her up. She's all like, I'm like, "Well, come with me." So we sit down and we're watching TV, and she's sitting on the couch, and not sitting very well. I'm like holding her head, and I'm like, watch. And so now I'm thirsty, so I'm going to go get a beverage and go get a nice little glass of Chardonnay or something, and I'm leaving her there. Good thing you guys don't work for DSS, right? And so I'm holding her head, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be right back, kid. I'm like, Maya, Hannibal Lecter, Maya Corwin, that's not his face, watch. And I run in, and I hear this boom and this screaming, and she come out, and she's on the floor. I'm like, what the heck happened here? I pick her up, and she's screaming, and I'm like, quiet. I shake her, and then she stops screaming. And I'm holding her, and I'm rocking her back and forth, and she begins to drift off. And right before she falls asleep, her finger comes up, and she begins to twist my hair in a lock. And this wave of emotion just came over me. And I realized that my passion about nature and my interest in being a conservationist had done a 180. I became a naturalist because of that snake. I became a conservationist because of that snake and my passion and interest in animals. I was now a conservationist because I was terrified, based on what I had seen over the years, for future of life on the planet and how that would impact the ultimate representation of who I am, the ultimate investment I can do for my species, which is my child, and the world that she was going to get. And it terrified me. And it totally refocused on why I was a conservationist. And as we discussed, we haven't done a great job. People wonder, what is extinction like? What is it like to see extinction? That frog you saw, that was Atelopes varius. That was one of the most abundant frogs in Panama. It was so abundant, it was the symbol of Panama on their flag. They were gold little icons of it that they dug up from the indigenous people that lived there, of the same frog. They were so common. But one day they became extinct in the wild. And that was the last wild one ever captured, and we captured it in an attempt that my friend was doing to try to breed it. It was such an embarrassment that the country of Panama had to change its symbol. They picked the harpy eagle because they didn't have the frog. It'd be like if we lost our bald eagle, which we almost did. But to me, the extinction story that really hits home is I was in Hawaii years ago, and this was for the series Going Wild. We went to film these rare birds of Hawaii. And this was with the Peregrine Fund, I think. And we had gone all the ways, this odyssey, to get to this remote aviary. And we get there, and the guy is very excited we're there. And he said, listen, we have to be really quiet because this bird's very, very sensitive. We had to wear I think, a Tyvek suit and step on special fluid so we didn't spread anything. And then he says, okay, I'm going to slide this open. The cameraman can put his lens in there. He says, Jeff, you got to be quiet. I'm like, really? And then Pierce is filming, and I say, I got to see this thing. I look, and it's okay. It looks like a robin. It's a brown type of flycatcher. And I look at it, and I look at the guy. I'm like, dude, what's the big friggin' deal about this? And he goes, oh, it's the last one. I went, oh, that's a foot in your mouth, isn't it? The last one. I'm like, well, what happened to it? And he says, well, most of the birds, native birds in Hawaii, are gone. 75% of our birds are gone. What remains, 50, 60% of them, are critically endangered. And our most charismatic ones are not even living in the wild, including this one right here. And it became extinct the moment the first people stepped in Hawaii and brought the wild pigs and the rats, and continued when Europeans came over and colonized. If you went to Hawaii 1,000 years ago, or less than that, 700 years ago, they had a giant flightless duck, which is great unless someone likes to eat duck and you're flightless. And that became extinct. And they all disappeared. The rats ate all the animals. The pigs created wallows, which messed up the interior of the forest. And some European sailors, British sailors, in the 1800s were really upset at a convent because they wouldn't let the sailors camp on the island. So the sailors took a bucket of mosquitoes and dumped it in their well and introduced mosquitoes, which had avian malaria, which spread through the rainforest because the pigs made the wallows. And you could see how that happened, how that extinction happened, and how it began. And now we have this one bird. And the Fish and Wildlife Service every day searches that forest for a mate. Every day. And the male sits on his branch in his cage, and he sings out to the forest past the electric fence to keep out the mongoose and the feral cats and the rats. And he sings this perfectly crafted song that never has an echo back from another bird. And I remember thinking about that and really being upset about that. And a few years later, I got an email from this friend, and he said, no longer endangered, extinct. When they went to check on it, and they knew the cage was silent at 6:30 in the morning, dead at the bottom of the cage because of avian malaria, which you can't keep out with an electric fence. And I always think of that story when I think about extinction. And I think of my kid and the world she will inherit. And I remind myself that while we have those dark days of conservation, we have incredibly bright ones. We are the people that took the bald eagle and brought it back from the brink of extinction. You know, bald eagles nearly disappeared 35, 40 years ago. How many people here, raise your hand if you are over 40? Okay, keep your hand up. I know when you're 40, the thing gets heavy. And take your hand, keep your hand up if you saw a bald eagle when you were a little kid. Very few of us saw them. They were very, very rare. 40 years ago, the bald eagle population was reduced to only 600 pair in the entire lower 48. Only one pair for the entire state of New York. Despite their great parenting skills, their babies were dying because their eggshells were too fragile because of DDT. But yet we fixed that, and now anyone can see a bald eagle in just about every state. How many people have seen a wild bald eagle? A lot of us have. We've been able to recover that. Look at the American alligator. You get the bald eagle. I mean, the bald eagle is a symbol of our country. It would be an embarrassment to have that fall prey to extinction. I always think of the story during a regiment not far from where we are now that fought during the Civil War, and they went to battle, and they battled with the bunting, you know, the flag hanging over this bunting. When they went to battle, they had a tethered live bald eagle to show how powerful they were to scare the enemy. And that bald eagle survived every battle, only to die in a fire in a circus when they were done with it and they sold it to a circus. So we took this creature on the brink of extinction and recovered it. We had to. Our country was at stake had we not, in a way, one could argue. But look at the American alligator. Yeah, in a zoo, at an aquarium, they look great. But if you were like in the Atchafalaya swamp on a Sunday afternoon, in your little inner tube with a cold beverage, rednecking it, enjoying the current as you flow down the river, and a big old anvil alligator head bubbled up next to you, you wouldn't be too thrilled, as you shouldn't be, because you're about to die and be eaten. But we can look beyond that and take this species, push to the brink of extinction, and recover this species and make it one of our most successful stories. But my favorite story about recovery is the black-footed ferret. It's the ultimate Lazarus in nature. The black-footed ferret in the 1970s became extinct. Why? Black-footed ferrets only eat prairie dogs. They live in a prairie dog town. Prairie dogs are keystone species. Lots of things live in a prairie dog town. But a lot of people don't like prairie dogs, especially with livestock, understandably, because your horses and your cattle trip and they cause damage and there are management issues with them. But you don't wipe them out. And we began wiping them. We actually created these grotesque vacuums that would literally vacuum them up and literally liquefy them. Well, guess what? If you're a black-footed ferret and you're a specialist and you lose your prey, you become extinct. And that's what happened. Closed the book. To lo and behold, one day, a rancher in Wyoming, his dog, Rex, I think it was called, I can't remember, dropped a fresh black-footed ferret at his doorstep. And this guy could have done a lot of stuff. In fact, I was told that his neighbor said, do not show that to the federal government. Do not. And I get that. I'm a very private person, and I get that privacy and not having people meddle in your business. And no one would have ever even known. But he didn't. He took that fresh black-footed ferret, the carcass, and brought it to the local Fish and Wildlife office. They went to his property, and lo and behold, he had the lost colony of black-footed ferrets, 100. But as fate would have it, within days of discovery, those black-footed ferrets were exposed to either plague or distemper, which can exist naturally. But when you have a large population, you can survive it. When there's only 100 of you, you can't. And they were reduced to a little over a dozen. And I filmed that recovery process years later in Colorado in a, almost looked like a penitentiary to protect these few left black-footed ferret. And I remember trying to find the glass is half full story here. Well, years later, with my daughter Maya at my side and 14 other people in Wind Cave National Park, we lowered down our little snarling, sounding, carrying cages carefully under the snaps and growls of what was inside, opened the door, and out jumped 14 black-footed ferrets into a national park, prairie dog town. And these prairie dogs looked at us and said, "What the hell did you just do?" 14 black-footed ferrets from 2,000 black-footed ferrets from a dozen animals, now surviving and thriving. So there is hope. We can do radical things. We can make the changes because we know better. And more than just knowing better, ultimately, if we don't wise up and start behaving with our planet, it's not going to be us that's going to pay the price. It's going to be our children that's going to pay the price. And I think that is the ultimate sin. Because in the end, this world we have today, we didn't inherit it from our ancestors. We borrowed it from our children. And on that note, thank you very much for having me tonight. Now what I'd love to do is take some questions, if you have any questions. Do we have time for a few questions?
We do have time for a few questions.
Yeah, and you can just raise your hand. You don't have to. I want to take a picture. I always like to take a picture when I give a speech.
As he's doing that?
I will post this.
Right. I would like to ask people who would like to ask questions to come to this center aisle here, and there will be a microphone there for you to use. So please step forward. No, side aisle. Okay.
This picture.
Either.
Everyone say cheese.
Bev is telling me how to land a
Cheese.
plane, or you should be on the side aisles.
Don't worry. You'll see this in Grindr in a couple hours. Okay. What question? Well, who's got a question? Yes.
In all your travels, I was wondering what you thought about ecotourism. If we're helping the area by giving them money by going there, or are we basically exploiting and bugging what little wild area there is left?
That's a great question.
Thanks.
You know, there is no panacea out there in conservation. I've learned that. There's no magic bullet. We look at wind turbines, magic bullet. Well, guess what? Birds fly into them. But there's still a value to them, and they still have a use. Ecotourism is the idea that people come there, they spend their dollars, and a local community is helped. And the perfect example of it would be you create what's called an alternate livelihood resource possibility. Someone who's had a life and career based on exploitation of nature, which is understandable. If you're poor and your family's hungry, you're going to do what you need to do to keep your family alive. But you give them a job where they're sustaining nature and make them a part of the business model. That's been very hard to do. We find, up until recently, many of these, the money just stayed in the big corporations, either in the US or Europe or wherever they were happening in those regions. That has begun to change. And I think done in the right way, yes, ecotourism can have a big value. Someone very wealthy goes on a trip, sees the situation, and they have the revenue to make a difference. Absolutely. Someone who's getting a paycheck, protecting a tree and not cutting it down, Absolutely. So ecotourism can work, but it's something that you have to really manage. Yes?
What do, it doesn't sound like a microphone.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. What does elephant skin feel like?
It's very scratchy and dry and bristly. Except right behind the ear. Right behind the ear, it's like velvety soft. And elephants are just very gooey animals. They're constantly sticking their trunks everywhere. So you don't know. It's like you don't know where that's been. It's like you don't know where that elephant trunk's been. When that trunk's coming all over you, and it's not a soft skin. And I've been in situations where you actually ride them, and even in parks where I've gone on patrols with mahouts that protect tiger and rhino sanctuaries in India, and we spent 2 weeks on it, and it never gets comfortable. The only thing that's fun about being with the elephant is when you're in a river and you dive off it in the water, and it's in a good mood and you get to play with it. But yeah, it's not soft.
Does it feel like a tiger, kind of?
No, tigers are actually, even tigers, people think they're soft. A tiger is not, very muscly and firm, and I've actually helped take care of baby tigers, and there's nothing cute and cuddly about a baby tiger at all. Next question.
I'm just pretty much wondering what your favorite kind of snake is.
Well, my favorite, the snake that I dreamed of seeing when I was a little kid, was a hognose snake, an eastern hognose snake. And I searched and searched and searched as a child. They're very rare in Massachusetts. They're actually now very rare in a lot of places because they only eat toads. And they're just an amazing snake. They have amazing behavior. They feign death. They have a really cool curled up nose that they use for excavating toads. And I have been able to find them here and there. And when I was a little kid, I had a pet hognose snake named Gladys, which I had up until I was in my 30s. And then I gave it to a friend of mine who had a random museum, and loved it. Hognose snakes are probably my favorite snake. What's your favorite snake?
All snakes, I pretty much.
Yeah, they're all pretty cool.
No, wait.
They're all pretty cool. they're awesome. Yes, next question.
Hi, first off, thanks for being here and for also having such a great sense of humor. One thing I want to ask for the everyday person, what are some things we can be doing to conserve our planet? And then another thing, are there any technological innovations that have come out recently that would help?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we face, the number one thing you can do to protect species is protect habitat. It all comes down to habitat. And it's a lot harder and more expensive to restore a habitat than to protect an existing habitat. We also know that not only is it important to have good, intact, diverse ecosystems, but having the connective tissue that integrates them and pulls them together, what we call corridors. And all of that's very important. And especially in this part of the world, the prairie is probably the most endangered habitat, and prairie is very, very, very important. So I think the best thing you can do is to find that habitat that's a part of your community and do what you can to protect it. I would also say, what skill sets do you have? There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that are on the front lines of saving local resources, and it always begins with the local resource. There are things that are in trouble here in Illinois that need salvation. And there are folks, birds of prey are a big issue here. What could you do with the local steward trying to save these resources? What is your skill set? Is your skill set as an accountant? Is your skill set a business skill? They will welcome that, so that way they can have more resources focused on what they do. And the other thing I would say is you need to connect your kids to nature and wildlife. And I said this earlier today, that it's very interesting times we live in. For the first time, we have an age class of Americans that are physically, emotionally, behaviorally less healthy than the generation that preceded them. It used to go the other way. Your kids lived a little longer and had a better life and more success than you did, and that's kind of the way it's supposed to be. But all of a sudden, we've got a generation where we have huge levels of obesity amongst children and behaviorally. I cannot believe, it's incredible. I have friends, good parents, smart people, and their kids are medicated just to get through school. A friend of mine's a school nurse, and she's got all these, she's like a drug dealer in her cabinet with all the stuff she has to deal with. And everybody's allergic to something, to gluten, to peanuts. You know, it's like, it's crazy. Well, I wonder if it's because we have failed to stay connected to nature and have failed to be good stewards of nature that we're kind of paying the price for that. You know, diabetes. We have more young people with diabetes than ever. It's not supposed to be that way. So get your kids connected to nature, because ultimately we are hardwired to be explorers, and our exploration muscles are worked and facilitated when we get and connect to nature. And the kid is going to be a great aeronautical engineer or a great politician or a business leader. Those foundational skill sets begin by exploring, especially in wilderness. And ultimately, if you want something to be around as a species, no one's going to protect something unless they love it. And they ain't going to love it unless they know what it is. So that would be my advice. Next question.
And this will be our last question.
Well, we can get these last. We'll get these last few right here.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm not in a rush.
Hi,
I'm at the Drake.
Just want to say that my sister-in-law Sylvia and Claudia are your #1 fans.
Awesome.
No comparison to the movie Misery. Quick question: if you could be an animal, what would that be? I know you love snakes, but
If I could be an animal, what would I be? I would want to be something that isn't eaten. Or painfully eaten. I don't know. I would probably say the best animal to be is an adult king cobra. Nothing messes with the king cobra. Nothing. And they live long lives. They're actually very intelligent. They're, you know, I wouldn't want to be a tiger. Being a predator is tough. You know, the #1 cause of death for a predator is? What would you guess? What? What do you think?
human?
Tooth decay.
Oh, tooth decay.
Tooth decay. A rotten tooth leads to bad breath, leads to heart disease, leads to a lack of appetite, and that eventually is usually what kills a predator. Yes?
Hi, thanks for a great presentation. Knowing what you know now, for the future conservationists out there going to college and spending all this money and trying to make a difference in wildlife conservation, what skills or experiences would you suggest they explore outside of the normal biology, wildlife conservation that would help them really make a contribution when they get out of school?
Well, you know, the advice I always give is really you're here, you know, to exercise your imagination and your brain and explore lots of things, especially in a liberal arts college. You know, you're exposed to all these things, but ultimately that has to begin to funnel and focus. And inevitably, you're going to be one thing, or you may be 2 or 3 things in your life, but it's going to begin, you will have a speciality. And you need to, as you begin to figure what that is, you need to be the best at it. And the other thing I would say is, as you work towards becoming whatever you're going to be, that it always begins in your community. I chose to live basically in the town where I grew up, and that's where I live now, because that's where my resources are. My family is there. That's where I went to college. I went to a local state college. And the job that I have today and the experiences I have today are based upon those first stepping stones of my youth. I'm still very connected there. And, you know, this community you have is a resource for you. And you need to really take advantage of that. And the other thing is, I think we live in such a culture where everything is instantaneous. You know, nowadays, they're even modeling shows. We have this attention. It's like if a video is more than 2 minutes, people don't finish it. Never mind a long, complicated book or movie or something like that. We have such short attention spans. We're always multitasking, and they realize no one can multitask. You're basically doing 10 things really badly instead of one thing very well. And the other thing I would say is, you're young, and we live in a very, which I think is wonderful, we live in a free and wonderful world, but you can pay a price for your freedom. And the social media, I see my friends doing stuff with social media, really smart people making decisions that I think they will pay for with, pictures and photos. And I know that sounds crazy, but people, the civility and respect seems to be not as rooted in our society as it used to be. It's incredible. Like, I don't even look, I never read a review. I never, ever read anything. Because if you want to feel really bad about yourself, read what someone you don't even know says about you. I know many people that are celebrities. We talk about it. Not that I'm a celebrity, but people I know. It's like, oh my God. It's like, and then of course you're your friend. You want to really hear them say, you know what I just read about you. You ever see that thing on the late night show where you read people's tweets and stuff like that? It's just, exercise civility, because the person you're trolling on now or hurting or wounding or whatever is someone you might have to work for someday. And I think that would be my advice. Connect to your community, find out what you're going to do, and be your best, and be respectful in any way you can be. And that's how you'll make it. I guess last question?
I've been reading a lot about what's happening with bees and colony collapse disorder and everything, and I couldn't help but think of them as a keystone species for us, and that most of our food is pollinated by them. I'm constantly amazed that people aren't talking about it or aware of it, and I was wondering what you thought about that and what we could do.
We need to get Donald Trump to talk about it. Boy, he's going to be an awesome president, isn't he? Kids will be over in Africa shooting elephants, which they do. I'll tell you, it's a big deal. I have bees, and I love my bees. And I have 3 hives. I lost 2 of them this winter. And colony collapse syndrome is really bad. We've lost 50% of our nation's bees. We now can't rely on natural pollination. We have to truck in bees. It's a big deal. And you're right, they are an indicator species. What does it tell us when we lose these things? What does it tell us when we're losing our nation's bats because of white nose syndrome? I went to a cave in Battenkill, Vermont, doing a story about this disease, taking out little brown bats, and now it's spread all over the U.S. It just showed up in Washington State, began in Vermont just 2 years ago. This disease, we went to a cave that the year before had 250,000 bats. When we walked in, it was just nothing but a carpet of pine needles in this cave, and only 12 bats survived. And we realized those weren't pine needles, those were bat finger bones at the bottom. And they were killed by this fungus. Well, why should you care? One little brown bat eats 12 to 1,400 mosquito-sized insects in a night. One colony eats 40 dump trucks worth of insects. Go to the Sonoran Desert, 50% of the plants are pollinated or seed dispersed by bats. Losing bats, a big deal. In our amphibians on our planet for 500 million years. No, 350 million years. Time tested, survived all the extinctions. We're going to lose 50% of our planet's amphibians within 3 or 4 decades from now because of this deadly disease called chytrid fungus, wiping out our planet's amphibians. This tells us these are the canaries in the coal mine, and people are just too busy. People aren't focused, and they don't care sometimes till it's too late. But it's a reminder that little things are just as important as big things, especially when they add up. So, on that note, thank you guys very much. It was delightful. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure for me, personally, to have Jeff Corwin with us. I teach a course on the relationship between people and animals, and I've used Mr. Corwin's book, 100 Heartbeats, every time I've taught the course. The course ends with a focus on how we can help animals after exploring how animals have helped us and how we've used them as resources. There can be no more necessary and vital help that we can offer than contributing to their continued survival and the survival of their habitats, given that we as human beings are the chief threat to that survival. And there can be no more eloquent call to action than Jeff Corwin's wonderful book. Speaking of that book, Mr. Corwin will be available to sign books immediately after this talk. And finally, we have a small token to give to you, starting with a monkey.
Sock puppet.
A sock puppet monkey as a token of our appreciation.
My aunt used to make these. I'll have to keep this away from Evie, our German Shepherd. She likes them too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's delightful to be with you, and it was a very special community here. Great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you so much for coming.
I'm good. I'm done.
Are you done?
Yep.